Welcome back, everyone. My name is Caden Light, and today I have the honor of introducing our utilities panel moderator, Gary Steffens. Gary Scott Steffens is a retired senior geological advisor for Shell Exploration and Production Company. His 36 years of industry experience includes exploring for oil and gas in most of the world's oceans and continents. He also conducted geological fieldwork in many remote places around the world, including the North Slope of Alaska, Canada, South Africa, Spain, and Chile. Gary built and directed numerous exploration and research programs and is recognized as a marine deep water exploration expert through his international publications. Gary was also an energy spokesperson for Shell and the oil industry, working with federal congressional members, Department of Defense Pentagon directors, White House advisors, Department of Interior and Department of Energy regulators, governors, state legislators, and numerous county and city officials. Since August of 2016, Gary has been an adjunct lecturer at Western, volunteer teaching in the School of Business Energy Management program. Gary and the utility panelist will directly engage with the audience for Q&A portion of this session. Please help me welcome Gary Steffens and our utility panelists.
Thanks, Caden. Yeah, I flunked retirement and came here, and I'm so grateful to be here at Western. And I've been having a really great time teaching a lot of the wonderful students we have here. So welcome this afternoon. This is the utilities panel. And I think this is an extremely important panel to convey a lot of what's going on today. And the objective of this panel is to kind of explore the opportunities and the challenges delivering reliable, accessible, affordable, clean energy. And I borrowed kind of a famous saying from a character that some of us may know from 20, 30, 40 years back. Anybody remember Kermit the Frog? And maybe one of the messages in this panel that I think all three panelists will agree on is that it is not easy being green. That is not a negative statement. That's just saying the realities in this transition where we're trying to get to affordable, reliable, accessible, clean energy is a complex task. There are a lot of realities out there that these panelists are faced with on a day-to-day basis just to keep our electricity up and running and having it on 24/7. And just, you know, here's a number of them right here. They've got to deal with an evolving resource portfolios with increasing demand, competing stakeholder needs. You're going to hear where maybe not all stakeholders agree with every aspect of what kind of energy they want in their community. Social and regulatory changes and the increasing scrutiny of having clean, affordable energy, infrastructure limitations, continual technology advancements, and then the workforce training that has to go with it every time there's some new technology that they want to implement, and then the workforce that has to be trained to make sure they can implement it. And then there's all kinds of scale, reliability, storage, supply chain issues that they're always dealing with, and full life cycle considerations with even some of the new technologies. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel here. To the audience right here is Kent Singer. He is the Executive Director of the Colorado Rural Electric Association. He's actually the guy in charge of 21 out of the 22 rural electric co-ops here in Colorado. In center stage here is Jessica Keller. She's the manager of commercialization from Xcel Energy. And on the audience left is Drew Bolin, who is the director of strategic communications for the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. So with that, I would like for each of you to quickly introduce yourself and give a little bit of your background and what you think you want to talk about today.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate that very much. It's great to be in Gunnison. have a chance to talk about my favorite subject, electric co-ops. Just to kind of clarify, I'm the executive director of the Trade Association, and not too close. You're on? I'll keep going. So I don't head up any of the members of CREA. We're the Trade Association headquartered in Denver. So we provide a variety of services to almost all the electric co-ops in Colorado. In a little bit here, I'll kind of show a map of that. So we do lobbying at the state capitol if there are policy issues that come up, legislation that could affect electric co-ops. We have lobbyists that work on that. We publish Colorado Country Life magazine, which some of you may get. Are there GCEA members in the crowd? So there's quite a few. And actually, this panel will be followed by Mike McBride, who's the CEO of GCEA and obviously one of our members. So we do the lobbying. We have a communications function. We do a lot of education programs for co-op staff and co-op board members. It's a really complex and changing industry, so we do our best to keep our members on top of what's going on in the industry. And then we have a safety program as well. So we have a team of 4 people who go around the state and help supplement all of the training work, safety training work that our co-ops do. And you all know the line workers, I mean, it's kind of an inherently dangerous business. And all our co-ops have great safety training programs in-house, but we supplement that with staff at CREA. My background, I've been in this job for 14 years. Prior to becoming the executive director, I was CREA's general counsel, and I was also general counsel for Holy Cross Energy, another co-op up in Glenwood Springs. And I was a corporate counsel for Tri-State G&T and did a lot of transmission-related litigation for Tri-State. So that's my background.
Jessica?
Great. Well, I'm Jessica Kelleher, and I am the manager for commercialization at Xcel Energy, which is part of our customer team there. So we're very focused on providing solutions to customers, and so we're focused on that. I'm going to give a little bit of a different background just because I'm really excited to be here at Western. I'm excited for this next generation of energy professionals coming out of this group. I think it's awesome and ambitious that you guys are putting on this event and getting this cross collaboration going here at your university. And I just want to encourage it, because the more educated people we have in the energy space, the better. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and how I got here, because to be honest, I joined Xcel in May of this year. So my 2 colleagues on the panel know probably 50 times more than I do about my own company, but I have some stuff to share. I'm, Colorado native, grew up here, love Colorado, am a geologist by trade, went to school up in Boulder, and ultimately did a master's in climate science. And I remember becoming extremely passionate about the climate situation. Like, I remember the day I was sitting in my chair and I realized like carbon dioxide can like change the atmosphere and the environment. Like that it was like, whoa, it shook me. And so I decided to commit myself to working on that. I went to DC, got involved in policy work. Highly recommend a stint in DC for anyone who's looking to grow their experiences. Worked on public lands conservation while I was out there, and helped the Obama administration start declaring their national monuments. I was helping with Obama's first 2, Fort Monroe and Fort Ord. And I think he went on to declare like 30 national monuments. So it was a really fun, politically active period. While I was in all of these policy related fields, I was working a lot on the energy siting work. So especially in a place like Gunnison, you're dealing with how do you get renewable energy and new energy sources into lands that are very worth protecting, and how do you balance those 2 needs. And so I was working on the renewable energy zones and the transmission siting back in the day while they were trying to be proactive about that, and ultimately ended up coming back to Colorado and joining the energy industry. And I started working for a natural gas company at that point. DCP Midstream, where Sarah had worked earlier. and that was it couldn't have been a more exciting time to be in the oil and gas space, because it's when the oil and gas U.S. industry completely transformed. The shale revolution, the beginning of fracking and being more efficient at getting the oil out from what we're able to produce and get it to market, was happening in the early, or starting, from about 2009 to 2015. The U.S. doubled our oil production because of the shale revolution. And in 2015, we started being able to export oil. So if you think about how that has transformed our energy mix here in the U.S., it's completely different than it was, 15 years ago. And so I think that's just a really important thing to note, because I kind of came in saying, oh, I'm just going to learn gas real quick so I can go work for the renewables. But I was really humbled when I got into the gas space and realized how much oil and gas we consume and how quickly the U.S. economy transitioned there. And so after oil and gas, I moved on to work at a Ormat geothermal company, and now I'm at Xcel. So I look forward to sort of working with you guys and learning what your questions are.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Drew?
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Drew Bolin. First of all, thank you all for having us here at Western. It's a great experience. I'm with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. I've been with the Utilities Commission for over 10 years. 8 of that was as research director. I've been lucky to have been a former director of the State Energy Office years ago. And then my current job is doing a lot of communications and a whole bunch of different things. One interesting thing to note is about 5 to 10% of my job is being one of 2 people that is needs to monitor major blackouts or energy emergencies. So there's 2 of us that if there's, bad things that happen like a flood or a fire and there's transmission lines that are in jeopardy and that sort of thing, we actually go down to the State Emergency Operations Center in the Denver Tech Center. It's an office building, but we nickname it the bunker because there's these windows and you have Kevlar shades and the whole shebang. But that's part of my fun job. So only about 5 to 10%, and hopefully I don't do it that often. And then just a personal story. My family and I, we've kept our grandparents' 4th generation farm and ranch in our family, and it's northeast Colorado, northeast of Greeley. And right now it has a pump jack on it, but then also we have transmission lines, big high voltage 230 kV transmission lines that bring wind power from about 500 wind turbines from kind of the northern border of Colorado all the way down across our farmland, and then brings it into Denver. So
thank you, Drew. Already we're getting some great questions from the audience, but we're going to first start with 1 or 2 questions that we had prepared. The first one for all of you, and I want to ask all of you, who are your stakeholders and what are their needs? And very specifically, if there are competing interests with your stakeholders, how are you prioritizing and balancing those needs while still delivering energy 24/7? Kent, you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll tackle that. So I've just got a couple of slides to be responsive to this. First, just a really quick overview of the REA program. You may know some of this, but in 1935, 9 out of 10 rural homesteads, farms did not have electricity, whereas 9 out of 10 folks who lived in urban areas had electricity. So FDR is president. We're in the Depression. Part of the New Deal were all of these jobs programs, the CCC and TVA and a bunch of different jobs programs. And to some extent, the REA, which is the Rural Electrification Administration, was created in response to the Depression, but also to try to find a way to get electricity to rural America. So long story short, FDR signs an executive order in 1935. Congress follows that up with legislation in 1936 to create the foundation of the REA program today, which basically was just a low interest loan program. So families and farmers got together all over the country and contributed their $5 or whatever to leverage loans from the federal government to start electric utilities in rural America. And so this is what it looks like today. You've got about 900 co-ops in 48 states that serve about 42 million people. So that's the co-op map across the country. If you're not in a shaded area, then you probably get your power from an investor-owned utility like Xcel or a municipal utility. There are hundreds of municipal utilities, like here in Gunnison, the city of Gunnison has a municipal utility, and then a whole lot of the country is served by co-ops, about 70% of the United States. Moving on to Colorado specifically, that's the map for where we are. And co-ops serve about 70% of the landmass of the state, but only about 20% of the consumers. So co-ops are serving a lot of the really sparsely populated territory. And a couple of the distinguishing features of co-ops, just to keep in mind, they're nonprofit electric utilities. So if an electric co-op makes a profit in a particular year, it allocates that profit to its members in accordance with their patronage, and then from time to time determines if it can retire and pay back that amount of money. Some of you may have gotten checks from Gunnison County over the years. But this is our membership. 21 of these 22 distribution co-ops belong to CREA, the trade association, and then Tri-State G&T belongs to CREA. It's a really interesting dynamic right now in the last couple of years and what's going on in the industry, the co-op industry. You've got co-ops considering other options. Right now, of the 22 distribution co-ops, 17 get their power from Tri-State, 4 get their power from Xcel Energy, and 1 buys power from a power marketer called Guzman Energy. And just in the last 6 or 8 months, we've had 2 or 3 more co-ops decide they're not going to go with Xcel. They're going to go with Guzman or some other power marketer. So it's really kind of shifting sands to some extent in the generation part of it. So these co-ops are, distribution co-ops. They buy their power at wholesale from some power company like Tri-State or Xcel or Guzman, and then they're on the distribution end. And they're all separate companies. They have their separate board of directors. They're very different. Some are small, have 2,500 or 3,000 meters. Some have 100,000 or 150,000 meters. And you can tell by the map that they are located in all over the state, very different political cultures. And that makes it an interesting dynamic for a trade association trying to represent all their interests. But these are our stakeholders at the trade association, and we do our best to try to do what we can to, further their interests and protect them from regulation. I say that with Drew here. Co-ops are not regulated for the most part by the Colorado PUC as Xcel is. And that was a statute that passed about 40 years ago, and it's worked out pretty well. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, co-ops are not regulated. So on this map, if it's not a shaded territory, and that indicates a co-op service territory, then those areas that are kind of in white are served by Xcel or Black Hills. There's the 2 investor-owned utilities, or one of the 28 municipal utilities like Gunnison or Colorado Springs or Fort Collins. So that's a really quick overview. And Drew, you want to add some points to that at some point.
So I'll piggyback up what Kent said. So there's basically three structures. There's the co-ops, and so their members are on their board of directors and they provide oversight. You have municipally owned, which would be like, let's say Colorado Springs, the city owns their system, and their city council people are they do the oversight. So their city council actually does the oversight over that. For the Public Utilities Commission, we regulate monopolies. So we regulate the 2 investor-owned, the big ones. So Xcel Energy, which is I think 1.6 million in Colorado, and then a smaller one, Black Hills, on the electric side, is generally kind of in the Pueblo area. But then we also regulate 5 natural gas companies, and so the Public Utilities Company, we regulate monopolies, and we regulate all sorts of strange things: towing companies, certain parts of pipelines. We even, believe it or not, we regulate Uber and Lyft. No one knows that. Railroad crossings and a whole number of other things. But but the main thing is we regulate Xcel Energy, Black Hills on the electric side, and then 5 other natural gas companies.
And being from Xcel and that investor-owned utility, in my role as head of commercialization, my main stakeholder is the customer, right? And like you said, there are 1.6 million in Colorado. In Xcel in total, which covers 8 states, have 5 operating companies. We have about 3.7 million customers. A lot of those, all the way from residential to CNI, all that you have. I think we've heard, there are also a lot of other stakeholders who influence our work, and we've heard a lot about that today from the other panels, both when it comes to local governments, local landowners, interest groups, what have you. And so I think you get to balance a lot of those comments that come through you. And we're always trying to thread the needle and make sure that we can balance as many of our stakeholders' needs.
If I could add just a few more things. I mean, obviously for the PUC, our stakeholders are, statewide, a number of different industries, but it's the ratepayers and things like that. But we're doing a lot of emphasis on equity, DEI. We have a bill that is Senate Bill 21272 that is having the PUC really focus on how we best provide equity. And actually, my colleague Jack Turner is over here. Thank you, Jack. And Jack's been involved in that. And so we're making an extra effort to, reach out to disproportionately impacted communities. We have a tremendous amount of filings and activities going on at the PUC, and we have public comment hearings that you can go online and be part of that, or we also do some in person too. So that's how we do outreach.
Okay, thank you. The next question, actually, I'm going to try and combine with one of our organized questions, and there's been some really great questions from the audience here. I'd like to hear a little bit about some of the success stories, or even those projects that have been, there's been some setbacks or failures in trying to get reliable, accessible, affordable, clean energy to our consumers. And corollary to that, from some of the questions in the audience, do you think our current grid is ready to handle the expansion of renewable energy we need to reach carbon neutrality? And actually, several people even have mentioned things like, well, what have we learned from the massive failure of Texas experienced during the winter storm? And friends in California now just expect rolling blackouts. Is this going to be the new norm for energy transition? So I think all of those questions are kind of related to, well, where are we? What are the success stories? What are the setbacks? And are we prepared for the big change? So
I'll take us. There's a lot of questions and subparts to that, but let me try to address a couple things. I think big picture, not just co-ops, but municipal utilities and investor utilities have just done an extraordinary job for 100 years, keeping the lights on. I mean, when your lights don't come on, that's the surprising event. And they're on 99.9% of the time. There was an American Society of Engineers survey some years ago. What was the most important invention of the 20th century? And it was the electric grid, because it changed everyone's life. And so I think the story from the electric utility standpoint, our perspective is we've done a great job so far. So now what happens when you're transitioning to a whole new set of resources? That is a challenge. I only put this up here to show that as utilities, we have the job to keep the lights on. And, we had these earlier panels talking about, well, we're not quite sure how we're going to make this transition work and whether we're going to get to net zero by 2050. And those are legitimate questions. And utilities spend a lot of time considering that, because when the lights go out, we get the calls, and that's really an issue we have to deal with. Is the grid prepared for the new resources? Well, there's going to be a whole lot of construction being done, particularly in Colorado. I mean, 4 years ago, our legislature passed bills to direct utilities to essentially get out of the coal-fired power business, and that's going to happen by 2030. Xcel, Tri-State, all the utilities will be shutting down the coal-fired power plants in Colorado by 2030. There will be natural gas capacity still, there has to be, to back up the intermittent renewables. But all of the additional renewables that are going to have to be built, and it's wind and solar, and it's the transmission to bring the wind and solar resource to the Front Range, primarily where the load is going to be a ton of construction. And there are questions about, can that be done by 2030, or the times that the legislature would like to see it be done? The utilities are going to do their best. There are supply chain issues. Gary mentioned that at the outset. But there just is a ton of work to be done. We have to increase wind capacity by 3 times, 300%, solar capacity by 5 times in that time frame in order to meet those objectives. I mean, that's a ton of material and turbines and panels and transmission lines that have to be built in a very short amount of time. Just a quick story. I mentioned I did work for Tri-State trying to site transmission lines. That's a very complicated and controversial thing to have to do. We spent decades, literally, to site transmission lines because people don't like them and don't like a lot of the other stuff that is kind of industrial in nature. So all I'm saying is I think it can happen. Obviously, the utilities will do their very best. It's going to be a challenge. There's a whole lot of potential stumbling blocks to getting that done in as quick a time frame as we've kind of been directed to do it.
Yeah, I'll just follow up in that Xcel in our clean energy plan is proposing to spend 14 to $15 billion on this energy transition to get us to 2028. And that's aggressive, right? And that would add over 6 gigawatts of new renewables and 600 megawatts of gas as well.
You might want to explain what 6 gigawatts.
Right.
So
gosh. Okay. So when you think of Texas and the outages that they're having down there, all of Texas is about, what is it now? Is it 82 gigawatts? 83? It goes up every day. I think it was 85 this summer. Their max load. So that's how much their system demands when all the air conditioners on and it's hot as all get out down there. So if you think about adding 6 gigawatts or 7 gigawatts of power, that's like a tenth of all of Texas's energy. And that's what we're trying to do just in Xcel by 2028. Now that's obviously it's going to be wind, solar, it's going to be battery storage. And we're taking a, shotgun approach. It's got to go everywhere. And I think the exciting thing that, under my team and the area that I am in the company is, key parts of this are, it's not just adding more numbers and capacity. It's actually changing how you operate the system. So it's putting resources at customer sites to be more resilient. It's increasing energy efficiency so that there's more load flexibility when, when we foresee an outage coming. So all of these techniques are getting put into play on top of just adding more, wind and solar panels, because that honestly won't do it.
Thanks. One thing that's really notable right now is that under what's underway right now is what's called the Power Pathway, and there's this very large Xcel designed it, applied, PUC approved. It's about a $1.5 billion transmission line from the kind of the northeast of Colorado that goes all the way on the east and then kind of down towards Pueblo. And it's huge, but it's going to take 8 to 10 years to build. And it used to cost about $1 million a mile to build a transmission line. Now it's closer to $1.5 million or $2 million. So when you're talking about 1 mile or 100 miles, you can see how that comes into play. I'm going to try to jump ahead on a couple of these things really quick. So let me see if I can take your breath away.
No,
or not.
Go back.
Yeah, there we go. So this took my breath away. And basically Elon Musk, he spoke to a conference at EEI, Edison Electric Institute, and he said to the regulators, he said, whatever you're planning right now, triple it. And of course it's, triple by 2045, but I don't know what he has in mind, but obviously we're in a very high-tech society. There's gonna be a lot of new technologies, new innovations. There could be flying cars, there's gonna be robots, obviously there's EVs, but in his words, triple it by 2045, which took my breath away. Then I wanted to share just some of the challenges. So PSCo, Xcel has 5 operating subsidiaries, and so PSCo, Public Service Company of Colorado, this is something that happened about 11 months ago, and it was in the dead of winter, and we had this big storm, and there was a lot of wind, there wasn't much solar, but then it just dropped off, and then in about 2 hours, 2,300 megawatts of wind went from that down to zero within 2 hours. These are the comparisons between the day before and the day after, but you can see even in the wind on the 22nd, wind was like 33%, and then one day later it dropped down to 22%. Solar was at 3%, and it was at 2%, and then so much other was kicking in. What this tells us is that as we go ahead and do more renewables, when the wind is blowing, the sun is shining, we do need more battery storage. And most of the common utility scale battery storage is lithium, but I did want to introduce you to this new battery storage called Form. And Form battery, this is a good question for this afternoon for the technology experts or for Sarah Burkowski out there. I see you. But basically, Form is an energy company that instead of having utility battery storage that holds, it's lithium based and can hold electricity for 4 hours, which, if you have a lot of sun and a lot of wind in surplus, that'll get you in the evening. So this technology does 100 hours. And Xcel is building one in Pueblo and one in Minnesota. So what's so interesting is how it works. It's actually by rusting and unrusting. Okay, I have a diagram. So what it is, I don't understand. I'm not an engineer, but they get actually 100 hours out of this 100 megawatt battery storage. And what it does is basically the oxygen comes in and it turns iron into rust, and then electricity goes through, and then they unrust it. Somehow that holds electricity. And Xcel has proven it out, and they bought one, and they're installing in Pueblo, and then another one in Minnesota. And then just to touch on what Xcel has right now. This is Xcel's current electric resource plan, and basically electric resource plans are filed with the PUC every 5 years. So this one will be finalized in December, but it basically is based on estimates and modeling through 2028. But it's 6,500 megawatts of wind, solar, and battery, and 600 megawatts of strategically necessary natural gas, and double the renewables on Colorado's Xcel system. It's about 10 to 15 billion, probably closer to 15. And then that gets to the other thing about cost. And when we talk about all of this stuff, we also need to talk about cost, because when we build new things, it's going to cost. And so when we're talking about reliability, accessibility, affordability, and energy, this all comes into play. So for the first time this year, Lazard, which is this gets a little nerdy, it's kind of the mainstay for the levelized cost of energy. How do you compare the different technologies? But this year, they went ahead and factored in storage for backup storage, so that you would, for the wind and solar, you also need to know some costs to go ahead and have backup storage. And they're factoring that in too. So I will end on that.
Just very quickly, your picture of the battery. What's the scale on that? How many acres does that encompass?
Yeah, this is just a drawing. Yeah, this is not a public. It's large, but it's near. It's kind of east southeast of the Comanche 3 power plant. And there's a lot of acres there. But when I mentioned earlier about transmission lines, I mean, if you have certain renewable resources, Colorado is very blessed to have wind resource and solar resource. But if you are building something like this, you don't want to build it somewhere adjacent that already has existing transmission lines, so that you don't have to build new transmission lines. It would take 8 to 10 years and $1.5 million a mile. So this is in Pueblo near transmission lines.
Okay, thank you. Can't have something to add? Sure. So I meant to make a point about one of these slides. So I did make here. This is supposed to be sort of question about, is the grid ready for all of this transition and all this new capacity of renewable generation? There's an entity called NERC. It's the North American Electric Reliability Council. And NERC is a nonprofit organization that tries to project whether the country will have enough electricity, essentially, for its needs. And it does these quarterly assessments.
And this was one I did, I think, in May of this year, where it basically said the western 2/3 of the United States is kind of on the razor's edge of having enough electricity. And this is due to the fact that so many conventional generation plants are being retired. Of all the coal plants I referred to earlier, we've got a lot of things going on here. You've kind of got this perfect storm issue where you're retiring a lot of conventional plants. The demand for electricity is increasing. We're electrifying a bunch of different sectors. So you've got these things that are kind of at odds with each other. And NERC evaluates this. Now, we rode through the summer in pretty good shape, although Texas had multiple warnings and California was on the razor's edge of losing, having blackouts. So it just shows you that, these shutdowns and this transition does have consequences. And it's going to be up to all the utilities and everybody else to try and figure out how to manage through this. And I think they will, but this just shows that we're kind of a knife edge here of having that generation in the country. So thank you.
Just that real quick, in conversations that I've been listening to internally at Xcel, this is going all the way. Is the grid ready for this? It's going all the way to your houses, right? Xcel is needing every time we go out and replace for service transformers now, we are just replacing with 3 sizes bigger, because what we're anticipating is not only a whole bunch more demand coming through for every individual home out there, but we're also anticipating the reverse flow of those electrons. And so it happened, the whole system is getting redone, and it's starting now.
Thank you. Actually, the audience has 2 really interesting questions related to what we've been talking about. Number one, who's going to pay for those transmission upgrades? And will it be placed on shoulders of the consumer? And number 2, we've heard a lot about natural gas, solar, and wind. I know you all aren't experts in this other field in the past. Where do you think nuclear may play in the future here? And especially with some of the new SMR technologies, the small modular reactors that technology taking.
I can take a quick stab at those. I am not an engineer either. I'm not an expert on nuclear. I mean, today in the United States, about 20% of electricity across the country comes from nuclear power. There are a lot of really great, reliable nuclear units running in this country, and I think most of those operators have figured out that they're storing the radioactive waste on site for the most part. We don't have a national repository, but that stuff's being stored on site. I tend to think that those plants are safe. France's nuclear industry provides about, I think, 80% of the electricity in France, so it can be done safely, I think. To the point about small modular reactors, there's a ton of research being done. Bill Gates has a company that's doing research on small modular reactors that shows a lot of promise. They're very expensive, and whether that'll ever come to fruition, I don't know for sure. And the first part of the question is, who's going to pay for all this? Well, in the co-op business model, the only people who can pay for co-op investments are its consumers. So to some extent, Xcel has a little different model. You have shareholders, which can sometimes kind of share that burden, but ultimately it comes back to the customer that they're going to have to pay for this.
So I'm not an expert, I'm not an engineer. A few things that are kind of interesting. One, Lockheed Martin is, one of their facilities is up in Southwest Denver, in Washington Canyon, and they're actually starting to build some parts of small modular reactors to get us to Mars. You can't use liquid fuel, or you need something major to do that. So that's kind of something interesting that's kind of homegrown. Small modular nuclears. First of all, we take 2 or 3 steps back. Small modular nuclears are considered generation 4s. When you hear about nuclear, like Fukushima is generation 1, Three Mile Island is generation 1. The small modular nuclear are ones today that they can't melt down. If there's some problem, the nuclear rods or the pellets just drop, and there's no water, and or very little water. So Generation 4 is actually very promising and not to be confused with the old-fashioned nuclear. A couple of other things that are interesting is that um, up until now, nuclear, you would have to go ahead and build on a site and put all the parts together and build it where you're building it. But last year, Rolls-Royce in England, they got funded to go ahead and do a mass production line of small modular nuclear. And what happens is if you do it in that way, just like a car, you don't want to like have your car built in your garage, right? Or like building a nuclear plant, right? You want it in a production line where it's all standardized and you can do many of them. So Rolls-Royce was got financing last year to go ahead and do this assembly line for small modular nuclear. They're doing it starting out in a big way in England. I saw literally last week an article about small modular nuclear in the Permian Basin to help provide electricity for oil and gas that is electrified. So you have zero carbon nuclear, and then you produce electricity, and then it would go to oil, pump jacks, and that would be done with electricity. So it's very close to being net zero. So it's promising, but it's very expensive, and we're not quite there yet. But it seems promising.
Well, there's a lot of questions coming in from the audience here. I'll try and capture a couple of them. I think you all are okay with these questions. So a lot more questions about cost to the consumer, especially if renewables are coming in and might be an increase in cost. And this may be more of a question for Karen. Will co-ops need to select wealthier areas first for renewable energy utility information and communication if the costs are on the consumer?
So co-ops, like other utilities, have certificated service territories, and they have to serve where they are. So it's not like they have a choice of where they get to serve. So over many decades in Colorado, the state got carved up into certificated service territories for utilities. So the 22 co-ops I had up on the slide, where that map looks today, they have the exclusive right to provide electricity services. As Drew was mentioning, they're regulated monopolies. So it's not like we have a lot of choice there. And I'm not sure what the other part of the question was.
This would you have to, maybe select areas where it's affordable?
Well, on the cost issue,
the consumer can actually.
Okay. Cost issue is interesting and complicated, and really in Colorado, we've kind of been heading down this renewable path for 20 years. I mean, the ballot measure passed in 2004, Amendment 37, requiring utilities to get 10% renewables, and then that got increased to 20% renewables. And we were opposed to that. Xcel was opposed to that back in 2004 because the prices were so different. The prices of wind and solar were so radically higher than conventional resources. But the prices of wind and solar, have been on a steady downward glide path for 15 years to the point where they are economic for the most part. Now, we've got to be careful. It's not always an apples to apples comparison. And sometimes you always hear that renewables are the cheapest resource. And in terms of a kilowatt hour, that's probably true. Is it backed up? Is it a one-to-one? Is it a 24/7 resource? Well, not always. So the cost comparison can get a little tricky. But that said, Tri-State, the supplier to most of the co-ops, has said it can make this transition without a significant upward increase on costs. So that's great news, really, for co-ops in Colorado. We're in a much better position, and we no longer oppose some of these things because the costs are much more in line with what we think consumers can afford. Hopefully that's responsive. Yeah. Yes.
I have something to add because in my group, we do a lot of pilot projects like heat loop or heat pump loops and et cetera. We also do a lot of the energy assistance programs. We come up with those types of solutions that we can get out to the communities to help. And we're actually really actively pushing that right now, especially following last winter with Erie. So those programs, are there for our customers, and we are doing education to the extent that we can to get it out. I will say when you do look at, just starting a pilot or trying to pilot a new technology, there's this question then, we get the edict down from the state legislature, do pilot this new energy project. And so we then go start strategizing, where are we going to do it? Are we going to do it in this community, that community? Which community is poised best? Obviously, the more affluent communities have more infrastructure already installed. It makes it easier to deploy, but that's not our goal per se. And so we have to work hard because those costs then do get socialized across the rate base, and that's why we are regulated by the PUC.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, yes, when you build new things, somebody's got to pay for it. But one thing I would introduce is, there is the Inflation Reduction Act. It has huge dollars for a lot of different technologies, and the utilities are applying for those. I think actually your professor is doing a class next semester, I believe. But there's huge dollars to do a lot of different things. So when we're talking about some of these huge projects, yes, the price tags are quite large, but some of the federal money does help, buy those down a little bit. However, I mean, you can't think of federal money as free. I mean, we're just paying for it differently. And so our federal taxes, they go to the federal government and then come down. So if we're paying for it, there will be some increased costs on the bill, but it may also be in terms of taxes too. One good thing that the legislature does a number of good things, going on, but one thing that they have done that's pro is a number of the pieces of legislation they'll have a 2% cost cap on certain things. So if things get too outrageously expensive, there is a 2% cost cap on some things, and I don't really want to get into all the details here, but there is some safety net, shall we say?
Right. Maybe use another audience question here that we haven't really talked about, and that is, what can the utilities do to decrease energy demand? And given that all energy sources have significant environmental and social costs, how can we conserve energy, and what are the utilities doing in terms of energy conservation? You want to tackle that question?
I'll totally tackle that because that's what we like to do in my group. There's a lot of energy conservation that is still out there to be done, and it just becomes a question of cost effectiveness and motivation. Excel has a great history of replacing refrigerators and coming in and doing energy audits. We have programs that work with big industrial customers where we go in and we help them analyze, like, if you change these pumps and you do this to your air compressor system, you'll be saving a tenth of your energy. I mean, massive savings out there for hospitals or buildings across the board. I think there's been some policy work going along with the electrification or beneficial electrification here in the Denver area, which is putting a ton of pressure to electrify buildings, and that will ultimately make things more efficient. But yeah, I would say, and even in my past experience doing waste heat recovery with ORMAT, a geothermal technology, but basically using it above ground, if you look at the amount of oil and gas and how it's used, the amount of fossil fuel energy that is used, we're actually wasting about 60% of that across the board from the U.S. perspective. It's going up in heat. And so if you think about, how do you use that more efficiently, combined cycle heat, I think I got it backwards, sorry. But there's so much out there that we can be doing, but again, it's hard. It requires going in and fixing rusty connections and closing building envelopes. It's not like a big solar project that you're going to have on the front of the Denver Post, right?
And I would just add that the co-ops for decades have tried to encourage their customers to find ways to save on their power bill. Co-ops don't have any incentive to make a profit. They're not trying to sell more kilowatt hours. They're there to serve their members. They've got all kinds of communication tools, newsletters, the magazine that CREA puts out. Just about all those communication tools, co-ops are communicating with their members saying, you know, have you considered getting an energy audit? Have you thought about this, that, or the other way to cut down your power bill? So that's been a common approach for a long time.
Thank you. I'm going to try and get more of the questions from the audience. We got a ton of them here. So very quickly, and we're down to just less than 10 minutes here. What about the batteries? We're talking about wind and solar and the storage capacity of batteries, and we're looking at maybe new battery technologies. So how will these batteries be stored? And, how will we be disposing of them? Is there a plan? Is there a strategy that the utilities is already tackling with regards to batteries and maybe end of life issues with batteries?
It's pretty broad. Let me take a couple steps back. When you think about battery storage, it's not necessarily just a battery, it's more like an energy storage. So one example is, I don't know how familiar you are with pumped water storage, pumped hydro storage. So if you're in Denver and you go west on I-70, there's a town called Georgetown and Guanella Pass, and there's two reservoirs up above. So there's a reservoir up above and one below. And so at night, when there's a lot of wind and that sort of thing, and the prices of electricity are low and everyone's asleep, Xcel will go ahead and pump water up to make the upper reservoir full. And then during the day, when they need cheap electricity to meet demands, they'll actually drop it down and do the hydropower. And so you're getting that. So that's actually a good example of pumped hydro. And as an aside, 10% is maintained for what's called black start. So if the grid goes down, we have a role in helping get our part of the grid back up. But anyway, that's one example of battery storage. It's referred to as battery storage, it's energy storage, but it's pumped hydro. It's very cost effective, but it's very hard to find environmentally acceptable locations to do it. And Colorado hasn't done a lot of that. So then it does come down to different types of batteries. Your technology experts this afternoon, if you want to ask them a question about the Form battery and the iron and the rust and off rust and how that stores energy, I have no idea. But yeah, no, we are in a new world where we do have to address some issues that we haven't dealt with before, and that is that the lithium battery storage, when that's at the end of its life, what do we do with those? The same thing is happening with wind turbines and the blades, because their life expectancy is about 20 years too. So the short answer is we're not sure. This is kind of new. But in my world, it's very complicated, but I always simplify it by the simple answer of technology. So is there a way, a new technology that will be able to, decombust or address a lithium battery that's dead? Is there a better technology to address, wind turbines and, get rid of the fiberglass? It's got to come down to technology, but the short answer is there's no good answer right now.
Thank you. So actually, yeah, we have about 6 minutes left. I wanted to ask you about landfill technology. So, there's one question on here about cleaning up fossil fuels for future utility use, but you could also maybe apply that to landfill technology and the stored methane that may be in landfills. Are any of you familiar with what kind of projects might be ongoing, either on a national level or here in Colorado, about utilizing landfills in energy?
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting field right now, renewable natural gas. There are folks doing it all over the place, and it's a beautiful industry. And it's getting blended in and helping people meet their responsible natural gas requirements. I'm actually working on a project up in Wisconsin where we have a customer, a hospital, who is using, they have a landfill gas generator. So basically their landfill is producing methane. They've attached a power generator to it. So they have power and they're using that generator to power their system. But what we're doing is adding solar and storage. And so they'll be able to become entirely 100% renewable. The first hospital up in, Wisconsin will send information about that at some point. But it's really, I mean, they're really creatively working around it. The unfortunate thing about it is it's very localized, right? So you have to use it where it's at. And when you're generating power there, you're not generating it in necessarily utility scale quantities.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, one of our members, United Power, one of the bigger co-ops in the state, it's headquartered over in Brighton, Colorado, in Adams County, has a landfill methane project that I think has gone reasonably well. But as you notice, I think it's like a 4 megawatt project. Their total load is 600 megawatts, so it's a really tiny portion of their overall portfolio. So it takes a lot of landfill to create much power.
Right, thank you. And with 4 minutes left, there's several questions here from the audience about how can, as a consumer, can they get more involved in some of these utility issues and discussions. And there was even a question here about how can rural communities access funds from the IRA, for example. So can we talk a little more about community involvement in the utility?
Sure, no, great question. I mean, the IRA, there are many co-ops in Colorado who are engaged in making applications, sending letters of interest to the Department of Energy for the various kinds of projects. And in fact, just within the last week or so, one of the initial rounds of funding went to a consortium of 39 co-ops, 9 in Colorado. It was headed up by Holy Cross Energy, and they were awarded $100 million to do wildfire mitigation. So co-ops are all over this, and I'm sure that to some extent, comes from their members telling them what they'd like them to do on grid resilience, wildfire mitigation, all kinds of things that money is available for. So as Drew points out, I mean, this will be transformational for many co-ops, the federal funding on all this. In terms of how you can get involved, I mean, I'm biased toward co-ops. I mean, our business model is that, as Drew mentioned, our boards are elected from among the co-op members. If you want to run for a co-op board, if you want to attend a co-op board meeting, you can. If you have an issue or something you want to talk to the CEO or somebody on the co-op board, it's generally easy to contact that person. So from that perspective, I think in the co-op world, I think there are a lot of avenues to get involved. And I think it works pretty well.
At the Public Utilities Commission, we've made a lot of really great efforts on outreach and community involvement. We've done remote meetings, but we have a tremendous workload right now, but we have public comment hearings online. So if you just go to Colorado PUC, just Google it and go to our website, and it'll list when there's different proceedings and different meetings, and it'll, you can see what the key proceedings are, the ones that may interest you, and it'll list a date and a time, and you can just log on and Zoom on, and there'll be the 3 commissioners there, and then there'll be a lot of public comment, and that's a good way to do it. We've been doing it we have it in English and Spanish. We now are doing it on YouTube, and it has captions underneath. So it's kind of nerdy, but kind of fun. You could easily go on and just watch and just see what's said, but then you can go ahead and log on or sign up and go ahead and give comments as well.
Right, thank you. First of all, thanks to the audience. A lot of great questions, and I apologize if I didn't get to all of them. But again, I remind you, they're going to be available at breaks and all where you can ask some of the questions. But let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Well done. Thanks.
So thank you, Gary, and our utilities panelists for a great conversation. We're going to shift gears on this conversation locally with a presentation from Mike McBride of Gunnison County Electric. Formerly of Star Valley, Wyoming, Mike served as Star Valley's local co-op, the Lower Valley Energy's chief financial officer for 14 years before relocating to Gunnison and taking the helm of GCEA in July 2012. Mike is here to talk to us today about Gunnison's local electricity co-op, GCEA. If we have time left over after Mike's remarks, we'll collect and ask questions for the presentation using Slido. But please help me welcome Mike McBride.
Thank you. All right, I don't know if my slide presentation is queued up. Just keep going. Okay. I'm going to move really quickly because I do want to make sure that there is time for questions. This will be a breakneck pace, perhaps, but just a little bit of background on GCEA, established in 1938. Ken spoke a little bit about what was happening at that time. We're a not-for-profit cooperative, 100% consumer, member-owned and funded. So if we incur a loss or whatever, it all is paid by the members. Democratically elected board of directors, and our members are always welcome and encouraged to attend our board meetings. Ken talked about the monopoly aspect of our service area, that we have the right to serve. We also have the obligation to serve. If someone wants power 3 miles away from an existing line, as long as they're willing to pay for that initial line extension, we're obligated to serve that, and then we inherit the obligation to maintain that line. We have 1,100 miles of distribution line. 58% of that is underground. That's one of the highest percentages of underground line of the co-ops in the state. 11,596 meters. And our average consumption, this is across all of our meters, commercial, residential, large commercial, is only 938 kilowatt hours per month. That's lower than the residential average nationally, substantially lower. So we don't have a lot of consumption currently on our system. You heard some discussion about Tri-State. That is our current power supplier, and providing over 99% of our existing power. We have 3 local projects, 2 community solar gardens totaling 120 kW or kilowatts, and 1 very small wind project out in Doyleville. And then we paid for solar at the schools in years past as well. We do have 3 projects in the works. A 500 kW project at the Taylor Dam, which will provide about 3% of our power requirements, and that's under construction now. A solar array outside of Crested Butte, which is in permitting right now. So hopefully that will be built next year. And then we're in the planning and study phase for another community solar project, much bigger. Our strategic plan, we've got what we call the enduring priorities of reliability, safety, and business resilience. And then in our current 5-year planning horizon, environmental responsibility, being the energy provider of choice, employee care and engagement, excellent governance, and the member experience. I'm going to just highlight a couple things from the strategic plan that I think might be of interest to this group. We have a goal that by 2030, we'll have a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions versus a 2015 baseline, because that's the local community's climate action planning is on a 2015 baseline. We'll get our power, if we continue to get our power from Tri-State, which looks like we will as they move forward. We anticipate by 2030, there'll still be 93% of our power supply, and that power supply will be 70% renewable. That will come with an 80% greenhouse gas reduction. And then we'll do 7% local renewable generation from those projects I mentioned earlier. And then we're working really hard to promote beneficial electrification and energy efficiency, something else that was talked about earlier. And then one of our challenges is implementing rates that better align with the varied ways that energy is used today versus how it was when we started out. So some of the challenges that we have are, number one, our small size. In terms of kilowatt hour sales, we're the second smallest in the state among the cooperatives. We have a high cost to serve with, a low potential for revenue. One of the biggest challenges we face is this general misperception of how the grid works, which leads to some unrealistic and sometimes unmet expectations. And then also this, challenge of developing rates that are better suited to the current environment. There's a lot of pushback when we try to develop rates. I forgot to look at the time. Oh, good. I've got my countdown clock right there. So I've got a couple of minutes. One of the things that was asked of the last panel was who's going to pay for some of these things. Now, we're not doing the big transmission projects, but I wanted to share one or two success stories locally. So this community, or this solar garden outside of Crested Butte, is a great example of how do we overcome the cost hurdle. It's very expensive to develop solar locally at the scale that we can incorporate into our system, given our small aggregate load. And the bids we were getting for that solar project were much more than we could save by not buying that power from Tri-State. And so we went to the community and said, hey, we're 2.5 cents away from making this work. The community, with its climate action goals, stepped up. Different governments, primarily local governments, some businesses have stepped up and committed for 30 years to pay 2.5 cents extra for their power so that we could make that happen. So that's one example of it. Kind of got to the question too of how do you move into the wealthier areas first? I mean, this is a voluntary effort, commitment by the community to make something happen. So I think that's a great example. Just another little insight into GCA, and then I'm available for questions. In 2015, we became the first co-op in the state of Colorado to own and operate EV charging. And that was in partnership with the town of Crested Butte. We now own 14 charging stations across our service territory in places that no one else is putting them, like Lake City and Pitkin. So very committed to that. We also, I think in 2017, became the first co-op in the nation to hand the keys to an electric vehicle to a member and say, try it out for a week, see if it'll really work for you. And some other co-ops across the country have adopted that EV loaner program as well now. So that's about half my time. So we've got about the remaining half for questions. Sorry to rush through that so quickly, but okay, great.
All right, some more fantastic questions from the audience here. So one that came through that I think is on the forefront of many of our minds here in Gunnison County is how much space is left on our local system for renewable input, and what needs to happen to allow for more renewables to come online in our local grid?
There we go. Great questions. So first of all, in terms of capacity of our local distribution system, we're what we would call a lightly loaded system. I think of it like you go to the hardware store to buy an extension cord. If you need a 60-watt light bulb, or I should talk in LEDs, if you need a 15-watt LED light bulb 50 feet from your house, and you go down to the hardware store, they don't make a cord for a 15-watt load. So you buy an extension cord that will handle more than that. That's kind of our system. We have a system with a lot of available capacity because our loads are so small. And so we are only about 25% loaded. We've got all sorts of capacity for electric vehicles and all sorts of things on our local distribution grid. We're fortunate in that way. Sorry, the second part of the question.
I think that was it. Yeah. For renewables, I guess, a follow-up, I can go ahead and follow up on that.
Yeah.
What types of renewables are we seeing more and more implemented into our local system here? And is there one that you foresee specifically being used the most going forward?
Yeah, so we, for our own development, of course, we're doing hydro and solar. Hydro has the advantage of being 24/7, and so it doesn't require as much management of the load or backup resources. But of course, it's really easy, so to speak. It's been pretty hard actually to get solar done at scale, but it's pretty easy to do it on rooftops or whatever. So we expect to see that continuing to grow. And back to the earlier question, the part B I was going to say is one of the challenges is not so much in the capacity, but it goes back to that rate question. Our rates are really just keyed on the energy charge, the variable part of the rate, and the costs that we incur from generation at Tri-State on down through are primarily fixed in nature, maintaining and operating the facilities. And so 70% of our costs are fixed, but our rates are designed inverse of that, where we're collecting more like 70% through a variable rate. That's one of the challenges we're going to have to overcome so that we can incorporate more renewable. So physical capacity on the system, no problem. Rate equity, and that is kind of a challenge.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned that it was likely that GCEA would stick with Tri-State. What is the decision that's being made there, or what is the choice that you have to decide on, and why? What are the considerations coming into play when you're thinking about how you're sourcing electricity here?
Yeah, so I think there've been a couple of co-ops leave Tri-State, and there's been a lot in the news about that. There have been claims of a lot of money saved. I can go into that in depth offline if you want, but you can go to public documents and you can find that those savings aren't as big as their claims are. But that's one of the reasons that some are leaving, more independence and things like that. But for us, given our small size and our goals, we look at Tri-State with the responsible energy plan, and we're saying they can move us in the transition better than we can by trying to go to a different company, a smaller company. They've got goals of becoming 70% renewable, reducing greenhouse gases by 80%, and that moves us a long ways to our greenhouse gas reduction goal of 90% by relying on them and directing our efforts in other ways. So as long as Tri-State can continue on that plan, it seems like a good fit for us.
Thank you. And our last question, we've just got about 2.5 minutes here left. So I'm wondering if you can speak to, on the consumer front, are there any incentives offered by GCEA for local home improvements or efficiency projects here locally, especially given our unique climate and cold weather in the area? What does GCEA have for consumers to incentivize efficiency at home?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. We actually have in our strategic plan a goal that I didn't really articulate specifics on up there, but it's about increasing access to all of these programs for all of our members. And so we're trying to increase participation in our rebate programs, and we've got a bunch of rebates. And this is another example of community involvement. Our members voluntarily contribute $1 a month on their bill. Not all do because it's a voluntary program, but most do. $1 a month on their bill. That generates $127,000 a year for us that we can supplement the rebates that Tri-State is providing to us. So we have all sorts of rebates. And one of the things we want to do is increase member participation in those rebate programs from 3% annually to 10% annually. And so we really want to reach, in particular, the people who could benefit the most from that. And so, yeah, I had another thought that escapes me, but yeah, definitely get the word out. We have lots of rebates.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge that we've got a lot of fantastic questions coming through still, but we're cataloging them. We're holding on to them for follow-up later. But thank you, Mike, for sharing more about our local organization here. And thank you for spending your time with us today. Please help me thank Mike McBride.
Thanks for the opportunity.